And what are some of your concerns, I guess, in this psychedelic revolution and seeing all of the changes, both positive and maybe concerning? What are your concerns? Because I hear you really taking a very holistic approach as you're describing, having preparation, really thinking about having a safe person there and the precautions and doing integration work afterwards, processing. What are your concerns as you look at the current landscape of psychedelics?
Well, what are my concerns? I mean, there's one concern that I think was somewhat part of the Lycos MAPS MDMA
Mm.
approval through the FDA getting denied or
Right.
not approved, which is this kind of like overt enthusiasm resulting in kind of this like, belief feeling, like we believe that it's going to work in a way that might compromise the sort of veracity of the studies. I know there's a lot going on there, and I'm not making a stand as to whether or not I
Mm.
do or don't agree with the FDA's decision. What I'm saying is that that's there and that needs to be mitigated. And I think it is being mitigated as best we can, but it's hard to see ourselves when we're really, especially like the larger sort of the larger push for medicalization. There's one side of that which is like we really want this medicine available to people who need it, and another side of that is we really want to find a way to profit off of this. These aren't the same people necessarily.
Right.
Sometimes there's overlap, but it's in that same sort of move because the reality is like taking a drug that has no copyright on it whatsoever. It's like an open access molecule.
Mm.
Nobody owns psilocybin. um, like it costs a lot of money. Where's that money going to come from? Right. And then how are the people who are putting the money in to do that, if it's not donation, right, which a lot of it is, how are they going to recoup those investments? So
Mm.
all of this gets a bit complicated, and then that can sort of maybe compromise the
Mm.
veracity of the studies or just how we're moving forward with it. Um, and that to me isn't the biggest area of concern. To me, like that's going to sort itself out. I think the larger area of concern, well, there's twofold. Like one of which is as this process moves along, are those sort of profit motivated or sort of like extrinsically motivated persons in the sort of industrializing of psychedelic medicine and even just access to psychedelics, are they, and even those of us who think that we're doing good for the psychedelics and for the patients and for the medicines, are we going to kind of create this weird thing where the narratives we create, the mainstreaming that we do, instead of helping to transform the mainstream, transform people's lives in a positive way, are we going to create a scenario where we kind of shave the edges off these psychedelics as best as possible so that we can fit them right into the machine that's already going?
Mm.
And they
Mhm.
just become another sort of like pharmaceutical,
Right.
treatment, another pharmaco
Right. The
treatment
integrity of the
for.
medicine will be degraded if it's worked through the commercialization of these sacred medicines. Yeah.
To a certain degree. There's always going to be underground and how that has its own complexities and concerns, but
Mhm.
also we talk too much about the concerns. We kind of like forget that there's like, if it wasn't for, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people having absolutely positive experiences of
Right.
underground psychedelic use and
Right.
ceremony, we wouldn't be where we are. It's not
I
like it's all
appreciate that
bad,
balance.
right?
Right. I very much
Yeah.
appreciate that balance. Yeah.
And then I guess the last concern, um, and also, I mean, the idea that we think that we can control psychedelics, I think is outrageous, but there's maybe an opportunity for psychedelics to have a really incredible effect on our world. And I don't know if that's going to happen if the way that it gets institutionalized sort of does its best to like manage that so that
Yeah.
it's sort of like contained,
Yeah.
manage the side effects of psychedelics in society
Right.
and the same way that they're trying to manage the side effects of like discomfort or
Yeah,
overwhelming
like being
experience or
human.
something, right? So,
Yeah.
and the last one is the financial and social capital that is available through the promotion of oneself as an influencer in psychedelics meeting wellness.
Mm.
I mean, the reality is that there are a lot of people who are either actively, consciously lying and manipulating others for their personal
Mhm.
gain, using our desire to not feel sick and downtrodden by a part of me, but fucked up society.
Mm.
They're using that. And the wellness space is really polluted with that kind of behavior. And then others who don't realize that they're doing it because they just the logical fallacies that just like abound in their minds make it so that this all feels right and good. Plus, we've got the whole mix of just how social media affects us as people. And then we've got this coming into the psychedelic scene, and we get people wanting to become shamans or becoming microdosing influencers that make all sorts of claims that aren't actually
Mhm.
based in any reality at all other than a personal subjective one. And maybe we have just like accidental encouragement for doing things that end up hurting people. Now, this is going to happen
Right.
anywhere. I know
Right.
lots of people have contacted
Exactly.
me.
Exactly. It will happen everywhere, but I think especially with this type of work and when you're engaging with healing of the psyche and the unconscious and using plant medicines and just psychedelics in general, the integrity of the people who are stepping into that space, we hope is quite high. And yet we're human and there's these areas that you're describing that are of concern and
Mhm.
that balance. And so that's where I think you've really stepped in, and it seems at least that part of your goal is to lend some light into your own personal experience to help others in really exploring what the ethics of continued psychedelic education and use and healing might look like.
Well, first, let me finish what I was saying previously in that, you know, I recognize that all of this is happening, even just if there were no social media influencers, we've got mainstream media that says things that leads people to think that, oh, I just need to take mushrooms and it'll fix my depression. And then they
Mm.
end up emailing me being like, hey, it's worse now. It didn't work. How come? I'm, like
Right.
these kinds of things. Like, and like I wouldn't say I've stepped in, like I stepped in a really long time ago, and this whole like social media influencer, cannabis entrepreneur shifting their goals into psychedelic medicines in the midst of venture capitalism and all the rest, like that has just kind of like washed up around me. And I'm like, oh my God, where am I right now? Do I even want to be here anymore? But
Mm.
if I leave, then it's just these people. I'm just like embracing my Terrence McKenna there for a second. I mean, not to be too judgmental. I mean, like, it's obviously there because I feel sometimes it's polluting something I deeply care about, and I have to check
Right.
myself in that way. But also it's like, okay, just stay with it. Like this is what you
Hmm.
chose to do. Stay with it. At some point, maybe it's not what you choose to do,
Yeah.
but who knows?
Yeah.
So with respect to the next question, and then the fingers crossed is like, hey, we all are just doing our best. And like
Right.
the fingers crossed is that, as long as I continue to show up in the way that I
Yeah.
feel is in service to life, the best I can understand to do that,
Right.
then fingers crossed in the long run, it will have a positive effect on how all of
Hmm.
this comes to eventually settle. And if
Right.
not, at least on the personal end, I know that I tried.